Welcome to New York City and Mission City Church. We're here to connect people with God and with each other. We hope you're encouraged by this week's message.
Well, it is a special day. It's a day of looking backwards. That's the celebration part. And it's a day of looking forward, and that's the vision part. I don't know when your first time was encountering Mission City Church, but you encountered a place that's built on vision, a place that's built on a preferred future. It's out there somewhere. And the beginning of the Inferny Church is when they prefer their past to their future. And all of a sudden they sacrifice the future on the altar of the past because they so fall in love with their own story that they forget the story God still wants to write in the future. But there is a time to look back and celebrate. And it is that day. By the way, if we didn't get a chance to meet on your way in, I'm Garrett, and I get to serve as pastor here, and I'm so delighted by what God is doing in and among us. In some ways, unique to us because we've never planted a church before, and it's so new to us, but in some ways, of course, very old to God, right? Because he's been doing this a long time, calling people to himself and then deploying them for the good of those around them, all right? And that's just another expression of what we're doing here. So I don't know which Mission City you met first. Maybe you met this one. This is Gabby and I. After they make you file paperwork. You don't get to just roll into town and do this, okay? So if you want to be a church, you have to submit some paperwork and say, hey, could we be a church, please, government? Jesus says where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am among them. That's a good thing because we had 3 people. Not pictured here. This is 2/3 of the church. That's me and my wife, Gabby. And then Nate was the only other person, the first and only other person that had been a part of this to that point. This is summer of 2019. Maybe you met this Mission City first. This is a few months later. And you see here, we've got some friends that have come along to be a part of it. You got Michael here, you got the Humphreys here, you got the Hulls here, you've got Joyce and Maggie here. None of whom knew a pandemic was coming, like in a month, all right? But none of whom left the city when it did, amazingly. Maybe you met this Mission City first. So this is the next season. Now we are hunkered down, some of the same folks, and we are on Zoom. This is a very typical moment on Zoom. We still got Michael now with the half blink. You see we've added a few other friends here. You see Alejandro there, middle bottom, with a pandemic beard worthy of the ancients. So this is the way we spent several months. Maybe you met that Mission City first. Maybe you met this Mission City first. This was the next moment. We rented a little storefront on Atlantic Avenue down here. And it needed a bit of a renovation, and so we were able to renovate the floor and hopefully be a gift to them long after we were gone. And we started to just do the first versions of what a service would be, you know. So we started sitting in something heretofore unknown, rows. All right, so here we are for the first time having some sort of a liturgy together. Maybe you met this Mission City first. This was 1 year ago today. This was the launch of our service. Just down the block. So the theater we had rented for the launch a year ago fell through because it was too regulated and we just couldn't launch in that space. So a nearby church was willing to help us, and they said, use our basement for the first 6 months, no problem. So guess what? We did, and there we are. If you can see this building, if you walk out of this one and look left, it's just a few doors down, but that's where we launched 1 year ago. Or maybe you met this Mission City first. This would be just a few weeks ago with too many new friends to name. So I'm not sure which Mission City you met first, but I want to assure you of this and hope for this, that you encountered a house of vision, something that is future-oriented, not in love with its own self, wanting to narcissistically create itself, but rather for the good of the neighborhood, for good of the city, and for the glory of God, a house that's looking forward out into the future. That's what I mean by vision, having a shared and a preferred future together to the exclusion of all others. And so for a few minutes today, we're going to have a moment where we get to look back at it in a little more detail at what's been past, and also look forward at what we feel God might be calling us to do as a church body. And I choose those words carefully, by the way. I know it's pretty easy as a pastor to grab a microphone and start talking about what God called you to do. I'm using those words very, very carefully, sincerely, thoughtfully, and purposefully. I really mean today that we're going to look forward out into what we believe God would call us to do. All right? But first, I want to get some help from the scripture. How does vision work? Like, how does it work as we interact with the future? And how do we discern what the call of God is? And how does this work for good in our church body? Okay, so To get some help, I'm going to rely on a person who lived 2,400 years ago. His name was Nehemiah. Strange name if you've never heard it before, Nehemiah. To get acquainted with Nehemiah's situation, you'll need just a little bit of background information so you're not lost. Let's get in like a time machine. We're going to wind it back 2,400 years. We're 400 BC. And let's get in an airplane. I did that out of order. There were no airplanes 2,400 years ago. We needed to do the plane first and then the time machine. But anyway, we're going to get all the way over to where the people of Israel are living in exile. Okay, so this is not the golden age of Israel in 400 BC. This would be more like the dark age of Israel. This is not the time when Jerusalem is thriving and Israel is its own nation state. That would be more like the Solomon-David moment, if you know the Old Testament reference. This is a time when Jerusalem has been crushed and all of the people from there have been carried off in what is known as the exile. Sometimes you may hear Bible commentators talk about the pre-exile or the post-exile. But in the 500s BC, Jerusalem was attacked, crushed, lit on fire. It was a brutal scene that I won't describe in further detail. But the majority of the people were carried off to a foreign land. And there they were in captivity, living apart from the land that had become their identity and apart from the land that had become a sign that God was with them. And there was great confusion and discouragement as they look back and see that Jerusalem has been crushed. So Nehemiah is born into this situation, specifically under the Persian Empire. And Nehemiah catches a vision for what God might want to do next. And that's where we'll pick up the story. And we'll pause a few times here to hear from Nehemiah. He starts here. This is Nehemiah 1:1. So we're right in the middle of the beginning of Nehemiah. If you've never read it, you did not miss anything yet. This is chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, this is Nehemiah's dad. Now it happened in the month of Chislev in the 20th year. That means the 20th year that Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, had been ruling. So we're in about the 430s BC. As I was in Susa, the citadel, okay, so what this tells us already, I know this is distant geography here, but this tells us Nehemiah is close to power. He is working as an aide, to put it in our more familiar terms, he's working as an aide in the White House in Washington, D.C. So he works for the man, okay? That's where Nehemiah is at. He works for Artaxerxes in the palace, in the citadel, in the capital. And it was at this time that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. That's the region, that's like the state where Jerusalem is. So this is a potential chance for Nehemiah to get an update. How is the city we know and love and never see doing? And that's exactly what he does. It says, I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. I really think this is a simple and indirect way that all healthy vision starts. You know what Nehemiah does here? He takes an interest in something bigger than himself. You know what those three things have in common, the Jews, the exile, and Jerusalem? None of them are about Nehemiah. None of them show up in his Instagram feed. None of them show up on his resume. None of them are about his little personal micro narrative. He asks this question about his people and their situation and the city itself. So Nehemiah starts by taking an interest in a macro narrative. And that's a big thing because a lot of times we are very interested naturally in our little micro narrative, and we ask whole people groups or places or cities to serve our story instead of looking for a big story that we can get involved in. So maybe we could say it this way: great visions assume a bigger story than self. Great visions. If you've got a vision, it's not going to be great if it's only about you. That's the truth. Great visions always assume a bigger story than self. And this really challenges us because as a society, we have decided that the micro narrative that we're creating for ourselves is the key thing that everything must bow to, that we should follow. And that turns us into a user of New York City, not a servant. You know why? Because we start to view the city, when we're only obsessed with our little micro narrative, we start to view New York City as how it can serve our personal story, especially if you moved here from somewhere else. We start to think, New York City, you know what that is? That's a backdrop, for me to shine. That's a ticket to more cultural experience. That's something that'll make me feel a little edgier. That's a name I can drop. If I'm here 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, when I leave and go back to where I'm from, I can let it land on people that I was in New York, right? And people want to use this place to build up their own micro narrative. And all of a sudden, it's not about serving anybody or anything. It's about the micro narrative of self that we're living out here, and it turns us into a user of this place. That is not a great vision. It's not a great vision for you individually, and it's not a great vision for our church. No healthy church has self-consciousness at its heart. No healthy church has self-consciousness at its heart. I love our story, to tell you the truth. I just told it. I love it so much. That was the first thing we did was we told our story. I love our little story here as a church, but I don't love it more than the great, large narrative of what God is doing in history and redeeming people through Jesus Christ. So as a church, we've got to consider ourselves here to serve. We got to be looking for our place in the great big story of what God is doing and not have individually or as a church this idea that it gets to be about us, and it's about, New York is just some kind of a backdrop for us to live out some example of thriving, okay? We are here to discern, God, what are you doing at a macro level? Like, what are you doing? What is our role in it? And how can we see what you're up to here? So great visions always, always, always assume a bigger story than self. That's very different if you're coming out of a culture that tells you the self story, the self-created story is all that you want. They answered, and they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. So their answer is not good. It's not going well. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, look at his reaction, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. So this affects him. I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. This is not an emotionally neutral moment. Do you see that? There's no part of Nehemiah that's like, well, I'm doing fine. They're not. Favor's not fair. Haha, I guess I get to just sit here and be happy. No, he is deeply, deeply upset by the predicament that's out there. So great visions grow out of a holy discontentment. Something has to bother you. Something's got to feel missing to you. If you want to give your life to a great vision, you have got to have a sense that, you know what, I'm bothered on behalf of God Almighty. Like, I am bothered that this is going on. Things are not as they should be. Something is missing. Something is not right. And it's possible that God could be leading me to do something. I don't know what yet because I'm only 2 steps in. All I've decided to do is look for a story bigger than my own. And all I can feel right now is upset about what's going on. So I don't have a lot of clarity. I don't have a plan. I don't know what's coming next. I just know I'm bothered about what's going on. Do you know what bothers me? This is one of the main things that bothers me enough to pray to see a church planted. It bothers me that in this city, there are 8 million image bearers of God. When I say image bearers of God, I mean God put their thumbprint. God put his thumbprint on them. And therefore, they have priceless dignity. They have priceless value. They have meaning by default, right? And because of that, they never have to wonder. They should never have to wonder, am I loved? Am I seen? Can I be forgiven? Is there a way that God could make it all okay? Will he ever? Where's this world going? Okay, it bothers me that image bearers of God have access to those answers, but they don't have those answers, so they labor under lies, right? And wonder, am I loved? Is there a way God can make it okay? Am I seen? Does anybody know I'm here? Am I really made in the image of God, or am I just like molecules on molecules out here bouncing around randomly, right? Like, what's real? It bothers me that the truth exists and it will set us free, but it's not known, right? It's not known by those 8 million image bearers, not all of them. That bothers me enough that I want to share the truth that people can be known by God, forgiven through Christ. And that sets me on fire. It makes me discontent that some of your coworkers or friends or family, or maybe you, could be in a place where you're like, you are worth something priceless, like you are priceless and redeemed by Christ. But you may not know that, so therefore you go labor under some other set of ideas, also known as lies. That bothers me. Everyone should have access to the truth, right? That they're known through Jesus, that's possible. Everyone should have access to that message. That's what makes me discontent enough to want to start a church called Mission City Church. If we're going to take part in this, there's got to be something in a holy way that bothers you. Notice the word holy was in there. I thought about just putting discontent in there, and I was like, oh no, that's not clear enough, because we're discontent about our flights, we're discontent about the trains late, we're discontent about our boss. There's a very unholy set of discontentments okay? And that's not something God's going to use. That's probably more something God wants to correct in you, okay? But a holy discontentment is when you're bothered on behalf of God, not bothered on behalf of yourself, all right? That's what holy discontentment is. It's always an ingredient in a healthy vision. So look what happens next. Nehemiah decides that he's going to make a change. He goes to Artaxerxes, he asks for permission to go, and he gets it. Because when God wants something to happen, he opens the doors. So it says, so I went to Jerusalem. This is, by the way, a fun feature of this Old Testament book. It's written in the first person, so we're getting it through Nehemiah's eyes. So I went to Jerusalem, where it's a wasteland, and was there 3 days. And then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. And I told no one. Pick up on that. His dream is a secret. His vision is a secret. He wants to rebuild the walls. No one knows. And I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. And I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. And he says again, I had not yet told anyone, the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. But then the turning point. Then I said to them, then it becomes communicated, right? You see the trouble we're in. Do you see this problem? Let me spread my holy discontentment for a second. You see the trouble we're in? How Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned? Come, let us, not me, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer this derision. Things are not as they should be, and I invite you in. I invite you in. And they said, this is the only reason this vision ever lived. This is the only reason anything got done, these next words. They said, let us rise up and build. Nehemiah is never going to be able to put stone on top of stone by himself and get anything built. It has to be a part of what's inside of a they. It's always got to be a they. It's never an I. It's got to be a group of people who share this discontentment and try to do something. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. This is a huge moment, and it tells us something. Great visions only become as real as they are shared. If he had told no one, nothing happens. If he had told no one, nothing happens. There must be a shared dream and a shared dynamic. If it's not there, it's not happening. That's the truth. And this verse and this concept encourages me to no end because of how I've seen you, church, rise up and build. Over the last year, I have seen so many of you rise up and build. And you overcome a lot to do it, by the way. I know good and well that you sacrifice resources and convenience because you could have gone, to a church that's, not an hour and a half away. But you're here, okay? And you do that because you've said, this is the place where I'm going to rise up and build. And I notice that, and God sees that. Some of you make a decision to do the same kind of commute for community group. And because you've said, look, we are building something, let us rise up and build. Some of you could go to a church where there are more people in your life stage, more college students, right? More people with kids, or more people that are empty nesters. Like you could, or more people who are from your cultural or ethnic background that just might make it a little easier to relate. You know what I mean? There's a lot of reasons why you could have chosen to be elsewhere, but for whatever reason, God knitted your heart to ours to say, this is the place, let us rise up and build. Last week, for the first time ever, I came to church with no duty. None. No preaching, no music, nothing. Okay? And I got a chance just to walk in at 11 o'clock, or 11:04, because I wanted to do it like y'all do it. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, so I walked in at 11:04, and you know what I saw? I saw a sign with a person standing beside it who was like happy to see me. And because that person said, I'm going to build something, let us rise up and build. And then I walked in, and there's a sign telling me how to find the elevator, if you follow the thing. And so I get around to the elevator. There's a line for the elevator. I come up, and I'm like, this is what people do. This is incredible. Like, I cannot believe what's been built. It just gave me like a fresh appreciation for what's going on. And I walked into a prepared space, and somebody who knows how to operate these machines had just like set them out, for you, in anticipation for you. And I felt that for a second, and I just thought, so many people, our team, our church members have decided, this is the place, let us rise up and build. Not because I have to, but because this is the thing God's called me to. And I just want to be a part of it. And it strengthened me so much to see what is going on, just to get out of the work long enough to see what has been built already. I was so encouraged. I left just like floating. You could find something that is easier. I just want to say loud and clear, here's the thing about every church plant in history. It's half built. It's half built. if you want to go to a church that can set out the buffet of options that will just naturally appeal to you, we are probably not it, okay? Unless you happen to be between 25 and 35 and live next door. Then maybe we're the ones that win the buffet options, okay? If you're anybody else, if you have any distance, cultural, ethnic, age, distance, geography, if you have any other gap to cross, it's not a natural choice. It's a supernatural response to say, this is the place I'm going to rise up and build. And you all have made that choice, and it strengthens my heart so much. I have to pause here and say there's one person who's decided to rise up and build before any other, and more frequently than any other, and has more skin in the game than any other, and that's my wife. I am so thankful when we lived in another state, and I started talking about this, that she at least stayed married to me and said, we can entertain this, all right? And so we moved here, and then there was just there's been so many moments. She has so many good moments, but I just got to tell you about this one. Whenever the pandemic when we were in Zoom World, we had about 12 church members, and the pandemic was just crushing the place. And it just did not look it was not clear there was ever going to be a Blueprint Sunday. It was not clear there was ever going to be a launch. It was not clear we were ever going to meet you. It was just not clear. We had 12 people on Zoom, okay? And so at that time, I was very discouraged. And I know I'm supposed to be pastor man. We're walking by faith, not by sight. That's all great. I was very discouraged, okay? And one day, I got this box with this shirt inside. And she said, and there was a note inside, and it said something very close to, I know God will bring us through this, and I know I will get to see you preach wearing this shirt. So it's a church shirt. It's a preaching shirt. Some of you come up to me every time I wear this it's not a black t-shirt. Garrett, are you turning over a new leaf here? What's going on? I'm telling the story of my wife's goodness, okay, to me and her faithfulness, okay? So that's the kind of buy-in, okay, that without which we wouldn't be here, all right? Our vision is only real because it's shared. Do you understand? It's only real because it's shared. There is no room for, Nehemiah's a nice guy, and, he thinks these walls are important, so here, let me throw a few pennies at it and a few hours at it, and maybe it'll come together. No, that cannot happen. I'm in. I am going to build, and it affects me deeply, all right? So it's got to be shared. Now, at this point, this is the moment when difficult things at some point come. When you could be rocking and the walls are starting to come up, and at some point, you're going to have a chance to get distracted and discouraged, and this is the point in Nehemiah's journey where that happens. Now, when Sanballat, this is the dun-dun-dun, Now, when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and there was no breach in it, so we're pretty close to finishing the thing, okay? These guys, Sanballat and Geshem, sent to me saying, come and let us meet together at Hakephirim in the plain of Ono. Notice, by the way, discouragement doesn't announce itself. It's not like waving a flag hey, I'm discouragement and distraction. You want to come hang with me? They don't say that. They say, let's just come have a meeting. But Nehemiah knows they intended to do me harm. He sniffs out. Something about this is a distraction. This is not right. And I sent messengers to them saying, this is one of my favorite lines in all of Scripture, a really powerful line, and it's a line you'll have to know to say at some point. This is Nehemiah's response, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. I'm doing a great work right now. I have a vision. It's shared. It's happening. I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Can you read that with me, please? I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. That was the most pitiful mumble I've ever heard. We're going again. All right, here we go. I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? Listen, you've got to know how to recognize distraction. You've got to know how to recognize discouragement. I don't know who your Sanballat is that wants to tell you that it doesn't matter and you don't have a role to play and you can't ever find a home with these people and be a part of this church, or God can't use you, the city's problems are too big, blah, 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 blah. I don't know what your version of discouragement is, but you've got to know, you've got to be able to recognize it. You've got to be able to recognize a distraction, because great visions, in other words, only survive by avoiding distraction. It only survives by avoiding distraction. Distraction is going to come. It's going to knock at your door, and you've got to learn how to respond to it. Can you recognize it, and can you respond? This is one of my favorite ones. I say this tongue-in-cheek because no one's trying to discourage or distract, but pretty frequently somebody from a couple of somebodies from a church staff or church staffs that I used to work at in another state. Occasionally, they'll call and check in and be like, hey, you want a job? And like kind of like recruit, you know what I'm saying? Because they've got church staff jobs that need people in them. And we know each other from previous seasons, and so for whatever reason, they'll call and say, hey, do you want to come do this job? And I always tell them the same thing. I tell them, because these are pastors, they know the word, and they know what I'm saying. I say, I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down. And they know exactly what I'm saying. I literally texted it. I've got it on my phone. I don't have time to scroll through the camera roll. No one likes to wait while somebody else scrolls through the camera roll looking for the photo. But I've got literally a photo where one of my friends texts me and says, hey, blah, blah, blah job just came open. You want it. And I said, I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down, in text. And he said, sounds like you're a maybe. I'll put you down. Hugs. All right? So that's what he said. I'm telling you, you've got to learn to recognize, look, no one's trying to discourage me. That's more of a playful banter kind of vibe, okay? But I still know, like if I sit and think about that for a while, I'm like, okay, man, I don't know, old job, I know everybody around me, maybe an SUV and a house again, instead of, other things. Like, I'm like, man, that kind of sounds attractive every once in a while, doesn't it? But I'm doing a great work and I can't come down. So like you've got to have a vision in front of you that you prefer to the exclusion of all others, right? Or the first sand ballot that comes along, you're gone. Right? The first time you commit to a community group, you're like, okay, yeah, I can see this. I can vibe with this. I'm excited about this. And then like something discouraging happens in the first month and you're gone. You've got to learn to recognize, what is it for you? I don't know. I'm not creative enough to come up with it. But there are more, and oh my gosh, a large city is full of distracting options, more than most places you're going to have distracting options. So you've got to learn to avoid distraction. If you never say, I'm doing a good work and I can't come down, you've already come down. Like if you don't have any good reason to say to something or somebody, I'm doing a good work and I can't come down, you've already come down, right? You've got to guard your focus. It's a big deal. Now, the ending. So the wall was finished. We get really specific here in the celebration, which we're going to do for us in a moment. So the wall was finished on the 25th day in the month of Elul in 52 days. Very specific. God did it in 52 days. And when all of our enemies heard of it, look at the reaction. All the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem. Humans think highly of themselves until God does something. And then we get a little realization that we should fall in our own esteem. For they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God, which means that a truly great vision, always, great visions humble people, humble like a verb. Great visions bring people low. Great visions humble people and exalt God. At the end of a great vision, there's never a human high five like we did this. Like at the end of a great vision, at the end of the chapter, when the church, finishes its launch or finishes its very existence or whatever, at the end of something that truly glorifies God, there is not a human high five going, well, I guess that's about what we had the strength to pull off, right? That's not a great vision. A great vision is something that God has done, whether friend or foe looks at it and goes, humans cannot do this. And this is the only kind of outcome we want for Mission City Church. We want a story that only God could explain, like that leaves people reaching for an explanation. You know what I'm saying? Like we want a story as a church where no one could stroll up and be like, well, I guess this is about what modern evangelicalism can do. I'm not interested in what modern evangelicalism can do. I'm interested in what God can do. All right? So we are looking for something that at the end of the day, God makes himself known and writes our story. That God continually is showing and re-showing and presenting and representing himself so that we all look and we say, look what he's done. No one gets to take credit. Not even our volunteers, not even our staff, not even. God, in the final analysis, God gets the credit because great visions always end this way. We lower ourselves in our own esteem and exalt God. I don't want us to have any outcomes we could ever take credit for. Ever. I want something that's so God that he takes credit for it. Now, this is the end of Nehemiah for today, okay? So with this in mind, let's get really specific here and let's celebrate a few things past. At the end of the story, you might notice he said, in 52 days, the wall went up. And I don't know why he couldn't have just said 50, but he didn't use a round number. We got really in the detail. So we're going to get in the detail of what's gone on here the last year. Okay, are you ready? So first off, we've had our gatherings. So 52 of them. Okay, 52 Sundays in a year, gatherings. Some of you are not clapping because you're like, well, Garrett, that's an assumption. We're here now. No big deal. can we get to the good stuff, kind of a thing. And I want to tell you, it's a big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is because 52 times where there was just a patch of concrete, a door was open. More churches close their doors every day in America than you would believe. The church is closing its doors. But once a week, okay, out here or over there, a few blocks away, a church opened its doors and said, please come in, community, and know the God who already knows you, okay? And come and be a part, all right? You are welcome here. We got a seat for you. We're not even going to pass a plate. We're not going to ask you for anything. Just come in, okay? And so 52 times that's taken place in our gatherings. I've talked to some people who just walk in right off the sidewalk, okay? Which brings me to this, first-time guests. Our first-time guests over the first year, over 326 as of last Sunday, okay? Plus whoever's here today. That's quite, and I didn't even count the hundreds or so from our preview services that I did not count twice. All right, so hundreds of people have come in to this space. Some people found us on our digital platform, so great job, communications team, by the way. God can use technology, okay. Sometimes people who don't know the grace of God in Jesus come in. Sometimes people who do know the grace of God in Jesus come in. Sometimes a family member, sometimes a friend who's in from out of town. Sometimes a person who literally, wait for it, is on the way to another church. That's happened a couple times. Literally, somebody's walking by, sees our sign, and is like, never mind, and they come in. So I have no idea why that takes place. Don't you be doing that. You come here. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, but isn't that incredible? Some people, I am 90% sure some of you came here because your friend from out of town told you about something city church, and then but they meant another something, and you were looking for that, and you found this, and then boom, here you are. Okay, so all of the above, somehow or other, over 300 times people have come here for the very first time, which is incredible. Community groups, which I mentioned casually and didn't explain earlier. The community group is really the building block of our church. A community group is 3 to 9 people, men with men, women with women, who overcome the anonymity of the city together and build real relationships. If you come to the next 52 gatherings of Mission City Church on Sunday, you will not know the church. You know the church when you are in it and of it. And these circles have brought so much life and joy to our church. And by the way, it changes the number of gatherings we had too, because we've got 8 of these that meet every single week, and you add 8 of those a week to the Sunday gathering. That means our church meets not 52 times a year, but over 450 times a year is how often our church actually gathers because of its community group life. This is a space where lives are changing. This is a space where other believers get together and go, you know what? I tried to live my own life my way, and it didn't work. And at this point, I'm convinced the keys to my spiritual growth are in your pocket, because you can see me better than I can see myself. Let's love each other. Let's encourage each other. Let's get to know each other. Let's make it a safe space for each other. And let's stir up one another to love and good deeds here, okay? And that's what a community group is, and that is happening, and it is a space. If we wanted, and I genuinely thought about this, I thought maybe the only thing we need to do during Blueprint Sunday is just have a few of our church members, whoever wants, pass the mic and talk about what's happened in these spaces in their life over the last year authentically. Just tell us what's been going on. That alone would have energized us on Blueprint Sunday. So that's our community groups. Baptisms. Baptism is the entry to a Christian faith. Baptism is just an outward expression of an inward reality. It's where you say publicly, I'm all in with Jesus and I'd like to be a part of this. Five times we got a chance to do that this year. I had a pastor for a while who loved to say, got him in some trouble, that he loved baptism more than Christmas and Easter. I was a little suspicious of that, and now I'm not. I love the new life and the storytelling of baptism. Giving, this is incredible. Our giving, this year in 12 months, this room, our members and guests, okay, at Mission City, not out of town support, but our members and guests right here in this room have given over $100,000. In 1 year, we have about 50 members, okay? So, and a year ago, we had about 30, okay? So that's a significant amount of ownership, and that's a significant amount of people saying, I'm gonna put my money where my mission is and where my mouth is. And by the way, we don't even pass a plate. We've never passed the bag. No wrongdoing to churches who do that, but we're just not doing that. And what happens is about every 4 or 5 weeks, somebody in the announcement section will say, hey, don't forget giving's at missioncity.nyc/giving. And that's about as light as we go. And you, out of the heart that you have just decided to give in that way. That blows me away. That's a big, big deal. And by the way, it's grown every quarter. So, but there's more. Partners. Did you know that because No healthy church has self-consciousness at its heart, that we've gone out and we've found organizational partners who are doing work all over the city in all kinds of good ways that are equipped and have expertise and opportunity and open doors that we will never have, probably, to create ourselves. So we've just decided, you know what? The church is like the tide. And when the tide comes in, the boats all rise. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start giving money to the right organizations who are doing the right stuff. Okay, so currently that would be Young Life Manhattan, who's doing college young adult evangelism, the Send Network, which is our church planting network, which is planting churches everywhere for everyone. The Borough Church, which is a sister church of ours that just planted the same time we did. Restore NYC, which is an anti-human trafficking organization, helping survivors of sex trafficking re-enter society and find rehabilitation and peace and opportunity. Expect Hope, caring for women in the South Bronx and who are in unexpected pregnancies. Pray March Act, church mobilization and policy advocacy for racial justice and equality. These are organizations, there's more, I didn't even read the whole list. We are trying to support people who are doing good work in spaces that we just aren't set up to get into, right? At this time. So we're just trying to say, look, let's be generous. So of that $100,000 or more that's been brought in, we've given 15% of that, over $15,000 we've just given away. All right, and we've given it away because there are nonprofits who need their operating budgets covered, who are doing fantastic work, and they need to feel that the church is behind them and with them and of them. All right, that's something that's happening right here over the last 12 months. And we've got dreams. Let's look toward the future. Okay, we have some dreams. I am excited about what I'm about to tell you. There are a handful of these. Here's the main one. It's going to feel like a bait and switch. It's not meant to be, but here's the main one. I want to engage people with the gospel. The gospel is the good news that although we are runaway children from God, that God has pursued us in the person of Jesus. And he will never force us to turn back to him, but when we do and trust in him, the way our eternities, but our lives now also flourish and our relationships start to make sense. And the way we think about things like work and money and sex and all of the various items of life all of a sudden fall into place when we realize, there's someone who designed this puzzle, and when I put it together on his terms, I actually thrive and things work. So because of the self-made life experiment just doesn't work. That's the gospel of God, okay? And I want to engage people with it. You know what I've realized infects churches, big or small? Not doing this for various reasons. At the big church level, maybe we could say the temptation would be, you know what? We're not really hungry around here to engage people with the gospel because after all, we're big church. People come to us. They just find us, you know what I mean? And they pull up and they see us and they just kind of know about us. And we do great stuff on Sundays and the preaching and music is good. And therefore, there's just this complacency that just because people are coming that we must be engaging people with the gospel, which is not true. Sometimes people come and you're not engaging people with the gospel. So let's just call that like a big church temptation sometimes. But there's a small church temptation too. Did you know that? That we would probably fall more into. And the small church temptation is also not to engage people with the gospel because we're content to have friends. We're content to have buddies. We're content to have stepped out of the anonymity and confusion of that is being far from where you're from. If you're not from here, I know many of you are, but if you're not from here, stepping into a space where you're unknown and anonymous and you find friends and all of a sudden you're like, okay, yes, I'm excited about the mission of Jesus. I'm excited about the mission of Jesus. But come to find out, no, you're not. You just wanted friends. And coming here is like getting warmed by a fire. But you don't want to go back out in the cold. You know what I mean? Like you're warmed by the fire. And it's like you found a good thing that just somehow doesn't overflow in your speech to want to share, right? So what I want to do, not from guilt, but out of sheer joy, over the next year, I want us to raise the value of how we engage people with the gospel, whether it's in direct or indirect ways, whether it's scripted or not scripted, whether you planned on it, anticipated it or not. I want to talk about over the next year, how can we do this? Otherwise, by the way, this is why we named the church Mission City Church. I actually fall in and out of love with our name. But do you know why we named it that? We named it that because we just wanted to be able to appeal to 3 words and say, are we doing this? Because if not, our name's a lie. All right? So that is our mission, to connect people with God and each other through the gospel, okay? So that is my first dream, and it will be the number one dream for every Blueprint Sunday, world without end. Okay, engage people with the gospel. Second, I want us to go deeper and not wider with our strategic partners. You know, that list I read just a moment ago got pretty long. But what we've realized over our first year is whenever we spread resources very thin, and by the way, we could be considered kind of a thin spread resource because to do church like this with 50 people, you people are serving, all right? So there's a lot going on. So it can be challenging to meaningfully engage with 10 strategic partners. We would like over the next year or two to really do a great job with one or two, okay? So expect to hear more about that as we go. Third, I want us to build healthy culture in light of our mission. Culture is just an agreed upon set of norms. That's all culture is, what's normal. And did you know culture doesn't take care of itself? Culture does not take care of itself. And in fact, it doesn't really matter what I say. New people to this environment don't judge it based on what I say. They judge it based on what you do. They learn what's normal by looking at the others who are already there. Not listening to the person in the front's dreams, but watching what reality is and how this actually goes, right? So we're going to do a 6-week series of messages coming up here that's going to explore that. And our 6 habits, 1 per week, our 6 cultural values of the church, we're going to explore 1 per week and try to go from kind of a 1.0 understanding to a 2.0 understanding and build healthy culture. Culture is not just what you do, it's what you allow. And so what we want to do is not allow ourselves to drift from our mission and not drift from what we feel like God's put in front of us, okay? So we're going to build healthy culture. Okay, and then finally, the last 2 relate to our finances. We're going to start a 2-year plan today. We're going to start a 2-year plan for financial self-sustainability. We're going to start a 2-year plan for financial self-sustainability. Let me explain. Some of you are confused because you're like, wait, I thought we gave $100,000. Like, man, we're winning. Okay, Mission City Church cost $300,000 per year. So that's the math. Now you should be asking probably, where does that other $200,000 a year come from? And the answer is from a variety of networks, primarily the Sin Network, our primary partner, also other churches and other individuals all across the United States, frankly, who think that New York City is worth it, the gospel of God in New York City is worth it, and you are worth investing in to put resources into your hands so a church can get off the ground. Church planting is a little like, some of you I know feel like a college student who just figured out you were on scholarship. You are on a 2/3 scholarship. 2/3 of your chair was bought by somebody else. 2/3 of this microphone bought by somebody else. 2/3 of that TV bought by somebody else. 2/3 of this building bought by somebody else. So 2/3 of everything we've experienced today has been bought by somebody else, all right? Now here's the thing about scholarship. They are not designed to last forever. What they're designed to do is they're designed to stabilize, depressurize, and allow responsibility to grow. Amen? If you have a college student who's a child and you've sent someone off to college, the goal would be that and if they were to get a scholarship, the goal would be to stabilize them, to depressurize them, because it's hard to go to school, right, and provide for yourself when you're 19, 20, 21 years old. So we want to depressurize. But make no mistake about it, the goal would be that responsibility would grow, all right, and that they would be able to self-support at some point, all right? So similarly, that's the arrangement. Our partners, who in total are giving about $200,000 a year, we have about a 2-year runway before that probably drops off. 90 to 100% of that will drop off. So we have 2 years. That's a generous amount of time. So again, it's meant to depressurize. That's why we are giving this level of support. But we do need to see, like, okay, I am going into my junior year here, and in 2 more years, reality is coming. All right? So I want to pass that on to you as our church so that you can know what's ahead. And so what we need to do is in 2 years, we need to be financially self-sustaining, and we need to be taking care of ourselves, okay? And so to help us do that, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to break it into halves, and we're going to say, you know what? By this time next year, let's cover 2/3, all right? By this time next year, by Blueprint Sunday 2023, let's cover 2/3, all right? And then, of course, by the next year, we would prayerfully be able to cover the last third. Notice that we're going to try to not move the expenses up, all right? We've kind of launched the startup package that is Mission City Church. We're not going to try to make it more expensive if we can help it, okay? Inflation happens, rent hikes happen. We probably can't keep it totally flat, but we're going to try everything we can to keep our expenses pretty much flat as a church, so that way as you give, we're getting closer to that finish line. As you increase your giving, as new people come and prayerfully are inspired to give as you have, prayerfully that will allow us to catch up with what expenses are, rather than making it continually more expensive, and therefore impossible to ever reach financial self-sustainability, okay? Everybody there, business people right now, you're loving it. Others are like, oh my gosh, okay? Everybody okay? Makes sense? All right, this is where we're at. We're going to do this. Now look, dream with me, people. What happens, if you're inspired at all, what happens when we have not only, instead of a deficit, what happens when we have excess? Okay? What happens as a church when we go from being constrained in what kind of space we're in to not being constrained in what kind of space we're in, or whether we even rent it versus purchase? What happens, if you're inspired right now, what happens to the other nonprofits we support whenever we've got more of an opportunity to be creative? What happens if you've been tracking with any of the stories of generosity that have taken place where we've found people, foster families is one thing we've chosen to engage with, and we're buying iPads for kids and shoes for kids and mattresses for families, okay, and such things, and we're doing that for the sheer joy of it. What happens when we have fiscal excess where we can really dream, okay? Whose medical bills can we pay off in this neighborhood because we want to and they need to know a church is here, okay? We are going to be up to good things, church. We are going to stay up to good things, all right? So imagine, this is just the beginning. Imagine what happens when we cover our own operating budget, and then we can dream even further and truly be a sending force, just like other people have been sending ones for us. You know what I would love to do? I would love in 2 years' time, I would love to tell all those partners, you remember the networks and the churches and the people, I would love to tell them, hey, we've got the operating budget covered now. But let's dream together so that now your gifts are above and beyond, okay? Because it takes a team to get anything done here in this city, okay? So now we can go from you covering just operations. We've got that now. Let's dream bigger and see what God might want to do through us. I would love for that to happen. And if that feels insurmountable, I just want to tell you, here's a real number. You're like, oh my gosh, $200,000 a year in 2 years. How can we ever get there? Let me tell you what. At 50 church members, if every single one of us, and I'm not saying this is possible, there's a reason I didn't make this a 24-hour goal, okay? But if every one of us today gave $330 more per month than we currently are, if every church member at Mission City gave $330 more per month, you don't have to tell me it's not just laying around. I know it's not just laying around. But if everybody could give $330 a month more than what they're giving now, the church is planted, and this 2-year goal is over in 20 minutes. This church is done. Okay? So I just want to tell you, it's not insurmountable, it's not impossible, and we are going to get there, all right? So that is what is ahead for us as a church, okay? That's what we're thinking about. I'll close here, and then we'll sing just a couple more songs, and then we're going to have some food in just a moment. I love to read history, and I love New York, and I especially love to read New York City history. It makes me happy. I don't know why. I love to live in the present, but I love to live in the past and just walk down the same streets 100 years ago, and then 200, and then 300. I just like this city, and I like its story. And one of the things that amazed me recently, I was thinking about, was all of the big names, from New York City history. Alexander Hamilton would be like a huge example. He's getting some help from the theater industry presently to revive his name. Okay, but he defined for America the financial system, essentially, all right, and traded the political center of New York City down the river to Washington, D.C., and while we kept the banks here in New York City. And we all live with the legacy of that decision every day. He was pro-stock market. Did you know that some of the founding fathers didn't even want there to be a stock market? Like, they thought that was just not good. So he defined so much. So that's just one example. There are many, many others. There's Henry Hudson, who went up the river that some of you crossed to get here, okay? That's named after him. So there are so many. There are so many. We could go on and on and on. But what I realized today is I have more opportunity to influence New York City today because I'm just alive. Think about this. The titans of New York City that defined the world you live in are dead and gone, and they have made their last choice to nudge this city in any direction. So no matter how little influence you feel like you have, the fact that you have a pulse means you can influence this place more than the people whose names everybody recognizes. Because you're alive. You have an opportunity. Like, you have been given a gift of today. You've got some measure of health that is allowing you to hear these words right now. You've got some amount of time out in front of you, and you have got an opportunity to shape this place. Now, I'm not saying you're going to create the financial system and have a musical named after you one day. I don't know. That would be amazing indeed, but good luck. But that's probably not going to happen. But what probably can happen is if you wanted to throw your little micro story in with the big story of Jesus, you'd probably never be sorry that you did. And you would have more opportunity than anyone who's ever come before you and has already gone, because after all, they're gone. And you're here. And you have an opportunity. If you want to know what missed opportunity looks like, just go to Greenwood in Brooklyn and walk through the cemetery, and you'll see all the famous people, and you'll be like, he's done, she's done, everybody's done. You're not done. And you have an opportunity to influence this place for whatever little micro push you can give it. The question is, are you going to try to push it towards you, or are you going to try to push it towards something great? And I am defining great unashamedly as promoting the fame of Jesus and calling people to God through him. I'm all in. I'm doing a great work and can't come down. You're invited. Let's pray together. Gracious Father, your kindness is so good. And Father, I'm so thankful that you are the same God that inspired Nehemiah, and a team to put up walls for your glory that exalt you and humble people. Lord, I call on your power and invite you to build something that no person can take credit for. I call on you, God, to be real to us, to remind us that we are not a part of a church because we're expressing the culture that was pressed upon us by parents or grandparents. We are not a cultural echo. We are the people of God right now. So, Lord, speak to us in a way that seals on our hearts that we know you're real, and speak to us in such a way that we know that you're active, and do such things that only you could take the glory and the credit. I give you so much glory and credit for the last year. It has been a joy, a ride, a hardship, a challenge, a prayer, a dream, a hope, and a hope fulfilled. Thank you for friends. Thank you for lifelong friends. Thank you for a mission that's worth giving our lives to. Lord, we try all the time to live out some little goal that amounts to nothing in the end, and they seem so big to us. Lord, what's truly big is you. This earth did not come from nowhere. It looks small to you. You created it. The city did not come from nowhere. And the human abilities that build it every day, whether they're aimed in the right direction or the wrong one, those abilities don't come from nowhere. You designed it all, and you look at it as if we would look at an ant hill. And you are not impressed, but you love us all the same. God, help us be less impressed with ourselves. Help us be less impressed with our feats and with our doings and our accomplishments and our dreams and our talents, which are all on loan from you, Lord, and help us recover what it means to just pitch our little part in with your great story. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thanks for being with us. If these messages are strengthening you in your faith, we want to hear from you. Find us online at missioncity.nyc or email us at info@missioncity.nyc so we can celebrate everything God's doing in your life. We'll see you next week.